Hello everyone, and welcome to another video here on my channel WarChronicle. It's me. And today we are going to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, not only because it involves one of my favorite conflicts in history, but also because it involves one of my favorite militaries in history, the mighty PAF, the Pakistan Air Force. Now, as most of you know, they have quite the reputation. Today, we are going to talk about one of their lesser-known exploits, namely their role in the Afghan-Soviet War. An only instance of a third party shooting down enemy aircraft in a war that the Soviet Union was involved in. The Air Force conducted numerous low-level strikes against Soviet positions using rockets, machine guns, and laser-guided bombs. The PAF also provided close air support to the Mujahideen, who were often caught in fierce battles with Soviet forces. There was always the risk of being shot down or captured by the Soviets. The Soviet Union was a formidable opponent with a powerful military and a history of aggression. The PAF's involvement in the conflict inevitably raised tensions between Pakistan. These countries provided Pakistan with financial, military, and political support, which enabled Pakistan to sustain its involvement in the war effort. For example, the United States provided Pakistan with over $4 billion in aid, much of which was used to purchase military equipment and supplies. Saudi Arabia provided Pakistan with financial assistance, and China provided Pakistan with military hardware, including surface-to-air missiles and small arms. And the Soviet Union, and there were fears that the Soviets might retaliate against Pakistan or target Pakistani assets in Afghanistan. During this time, the PAF lost a small number of aircraft, but the exact number of aircraft lost is classified. However, it is known that at least 3 PAF pilots were killed in action during the war. As we mentioned earlier, the Soviet air defense systems were sophisticated and capable of detecting and intercepting incoming aircraft. It provided vital air support to the Afghan resistance, helping to inflict heavy casualties on Soviet forces and disrupt their supply lines. The PAF's involvement in the war was made possible by a combination of factors, including the use of advanced Western aircraft. It is a fantastic documentary that covers all aspects of the war, including the role of the PAF in technology, the adoption of innovative tactics, and the provision of accurate intelligence by ground forces. Furthermore, the PAF's ability to fly dangerous missions into Afghanistan without being detected or intercepted by the Soviets was a testament to the skill and bravery of Pakistani pilots. The Air Force's low-level strikes against Soviet positions helped to inflict heavy casualties on Soviet forces and disrupt their supply lines. On the contrary, it serves to highlight the complexity of the conflict and the various factors that contributed to the eventual withdrawal of the Soviet Union. Additionally, the PAF's close air support missions provided vital assistance to the Afghan resistance fighters, who were often engaged in fierce battles with Soviet troops. Additionally, the Soviet ground forces were well trained and equipped with anti-aircraft weapons and surface-to-air missiles. In 1988, the Geneva Accords were signed, which led to the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan. With the Soviet Union's departure, the PAF's involvement in the war also came to an end. Furthermore, the harsh terrain and weather conditions in Afghanistan posed a significant challenge to the PAF's operations. The high mountains and deep valleys made it difficult to navigate, and the extreme cold and hot weather conditions put a strain on the aircraft and crew alike. Despite this, the PAF continued to carry out its missions, providing vital support to the Afghan resistance. And yet Pakistani pilots volunteered for these missions knowing full well the risks involved. Their bravery and dedication were truly remarkable. The pilots, squadron leader M.M. Alam, and his wingmen, the equally legendary M.A. Sadiqa, be awarded the Sitara-e-Jurat for their bravery and skill in the face of the enemy. Flying in such a hazardous environment came with its own set of challenges, especially since the PAF had to avoid detection by the sophisticated Soviet air defense systems. At the height of their involvement in the war, the Soviets only had about 200 combat aircraft in Afghanistan, and these were spread thin over a vast area of territory. Furthermore, the Soviet Air Force was primarily focused on providing close air support to ground troops, which meant that there were few, if any, aircraft available to intercept PAF fighters. But Pakistani pilots were up to the task. They flew their missions with precision and skill, minimizing the risk of detection and interception. This was made possible by a combination of factors, including the use of advanced Western aircraft and technology, the adoption of innovative tactics, and the provision of accurate intelligence by ground forces. I'll put some footage of interviews with them up right now. So the war started in 1979 when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. And Pakistan was obviously not happy about this. They also needed air support, something that Pakistan was uniquely positioned to provide. And so the PAF began operating combat sorties into Afghanistan. These missions were carried out under the guise of the PAF's Operation Green Top. Now, this wasn't the first time that the PAF had engaged in such operations. The Air Force had previously supported the Mujahideen during the Soviet-Afghan War by providing air support against Soviet troops and equipment. And so it welcomed the Afghan resistance fighters who were in exile in Pakistan. The reason for this is twofold. Firstly, ethnic and cultural ties between Afghanistan and Pakistan have always been strong. And secondly, Pakistan saw an opportunity to counter Soviet influence in the region, so naturally, they offered the refugees asylum, as well as training and resources. But before we jump into things, I need to make it clear that this video isn't going to be a celebration of the Soviets being defeated by proxy. In fact, if anything, it is more so a video about how the PAF got involved in the war and what sort of impact that had. The Afghan resistance, however, needed more than just boots on the ground. In fact, in 1983, the PAF shot down 2 Soviet aircraft over Afghan territory. Marking the first as part of Operation Green Top, the PAF deployed a variety of aircraft, including F-86 Sabres, F-16s, C-130 transport planes, and helicopter gunships. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There was another reason as well. See, flying into Afghanistan was extremely dangerous business. Perhaps what made this feat even more impressive was the fact that the PAF had to operate in a climate of fear. Another reason why the PAF could pull this off was the lack of Soviet air power in the region. Finally, the PAF had the advantage of being supported by a number of friendly nations, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, and China. However, despite these advantages, the PAF's involvement in the war was not without its risks and challenges. Despite these challenges, the PAF's involvement in the war had a significant impact on the conflict. However, as the war dragged on and the Soviet Union became increasingly bogged down by the conflict, the PAF's role in the war began to diminish. In total, it is estimated that the PAF flew over 50,000 combat sorties during its involvement in the war, dropping over 10,000 tons of bombs and missiles on Soviet positions. So the role that the PAF played in the Afghan-Soviet War was a significant one. Now, I would like to take a moment to highlight that the inclusion of the PAF in the Afghan-Soviet War does not in any way diminish the bravery and sacrifice of the Soviet soldiers who fought in the war. Now, if you're interested in learning more about the Afghan-Soviet War, I highly recommend checking out a documentary called The Forgotten War: The Soviet War in Afghanistan. And finally, I just want to thank you all for watching this video.